From Their Eyes, a Shadow of the Colossus based fic. Chapter 2. The Lone Minotaur. Valus walked along his usual path, a path that he has been traveling for a long time. He always traveled this path, partially in a bit of penance. The path ran through an enclosed valley where plants used to grow. As he strode through it, it reminded him of home. His original home had been a very lush land and very quiet, much like the land here. However, there were also many others to commune with. Then came the exile, and they were all forced to come here. He understood why it happened. He had been tricked into siding with Dorman. For a time, they were the only ones in the land he now walked. Then the little people had come. Some had been scared of him and his brethren. Others tried to attack them. Eventually, they came to live side by side with the brethren. Unfortunately, Dorman demanded tribute so they could remain. Only Malice, the second eldest of their kind, realized what Dorman was doing and warned the little people. He then took part in the task to defeat Dorman and separate the powerful spirit into less powerful parts. As Valus mused, he passed the gap that allowed a view of the central temple, which was what was left of Dorman resided. He chanced a peripheral glance at the tower, which was also the link to the land they had left. He continued his walk, wondering if they would ever be free to return to their home and forgiven for their transgressions. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard Malice's voice in his head. "Beware! Dorman has managed to contact one of the little one's descendants. That one is trying to..." Valus did not hear the rest of the message, as he felt a pain in his leg. It caused him to stumble, and for a moment he felt like something was on him. It did not make sense. He got back to his feet and continued his path. However, something was wrong. He felt something climbing up his back. He varied his step, hoping to dislodge whatever it was. It did not seem to work, because with each step he felt something moving up his back. For a brief moment, a chill went through Valus. It felt as if something bad was coming, something that had no right to happen. He and his brethren were a dying race. Only 16 existed anymore in the world, and they all had a sacred task. No one could be so callous to want to end that. They would have to be a fool, since it would free the wrath of Dorman. His thoughts were cut off by a sharp, stabbing pain in his head. This was severe. It wasn't as if something had tried to hurt him. It was as if something wanted to kill him. He shook his head, remembering that on his head was one of the seals to hold in the part of Dorman's spirit he held. In fact, he was certain that's where the stabbing pain was. Valus shook his head and was rewarded for his actions when a small person came into his view. The person had obviously been holding on for dear life to his brow. He had to look cross-eyed to see the being. It was then he noticed two things. The first was that the person was wearing the same symbol that was binding Dorman's spirit. The second thing he noticed was that this small man had the same sword that was used in binding Dorman. His eyes went momentarily wide as he realized what was happening, and he started to shake his head violently. The man had already climbed back up, and he hoped that shaking his head would dislodge the man again. He then realized that it had been a warning Malice had given. It had been just at the moment that the man had attacked. Now he was being attacked, and he felt very weak. He then remembered how frail the small people were, and tried to fling the man free of him. Maybe the fall would kill the man, and Dorman would not be freed. Just as this thought crossed his mind, Valis roared in pain. It was a pain so bad he saw his vision blur. It was then that he felt his body stop responding. His vision was failing. He was dying. He fell to the ground, and in his fleeting vision he saw the little man run away from him. It was then he felt it. Dorman's essence was flowing out of him. The tendrils of that essence went out of him and into the small man. Valis closed his eyes one last time and thought to his brethren, "I have failed you, my siblings. You must stop this misguided man. If he knows not what he does, he can be forgiven." He didn't want to think the alternative was possible, that the man was a believer of Dorman's lies. As his other senses failed, Valis heard laughter in his head. It was Dorman, and he was sure that Dorman saw this as the beginning of his freedom. However, as Dorman laughed, he heard Malice one last time. "I will restore you once this small one is stopped." Valis could not respond at that time. He had finally given in to death. Dorman laughed in delight when the fool had killed the first Colossus. He was even unaware of the price he paid in killing Valis. It was evident in the way the man fell to the ground after the essence entered him. For part of Dorman's essence to go into the man's body, part of his own essence had to be forfeited. The result left the young man prone to attack, and his loyal shadow beings were there to make sure he was returned to the temple safely. He also knew that Malice would be warning the others, and may even attempt to stop him. However, he was certain that would not happen. The Colossi were all that was left in the lands. The only other living creatures were either lizards or the horse. He chuckled again to himself. The horse would have no purpose once the task was complete. In fact, he felt the horse would be in no shape to transport anyone when the time came. He then planted in the horse's mind the need to come back to the temple. He knew how the shadow beings traveled, and they would be back to the temple in a matter of moments. That quick, Dorman returned his mind to the temple, and saw one of the shadow beings standing over the man. He then felt it happening. The statue of Valis trembled and exploded. Already he felt part of his power returning to him. And if all went well, his brethren would pay the price for betraying him. He then thought of the one that he wanted revenge upon most, at least here. He focused his mind on them, and in that moment he noticed that his enemy was now noticing Something was wrong. It would take time before the true extent of the problem would be known, but there was time. Now Dorman had to wait for his pawn to awaken. Once the young man awoke, he would send them after the next of the colossi, Quadratus. That one wasn't far from the temple, and Dorman knew Quadratus would be shy, but curious. That would be the only way to take down Quadratus, and as the young man started to stir, Dorman told him of his next target.